banking system, that's fine. But there's a limit to the kind of risk that you may take, and if you make a profit, it's an individual profit, and if you have a losses, it's a collective loss. So putting in place different kind of regulation that avoid or that limit this appetite for risk is also part of what has to be done. And if we don't do anything of this, then of course means that we didn't learn anything from the crisis, and I can't imagine it will be the right attitude.
The failure to agree on new international financial rules will allow big banks to play one country off another to see where they can find the most lax regulation. Many believe the competition between New York and London to be the financial capital of the world was a major contributing factor to the 2008 meltdown.
Now, the real problem that we face going ahead is that this same kind of pressure, where is going to be the financial capital of the world, is going to come back once the crisis, memories of the crisis have faded. Certainly Frankfurt and Paris are going to be back into the race, but so are Tokyo, so is Singapore, and so is Shanghai, and so is Hong Kong. And what I think may well happen at some point is if Shanghai and Hong Kong combine, then you are really going to see a race to where's going to be the financial capital. And unless we have some kind of global oversight, it is going to be regulatory arbitrage. It is going to be a race to the bottom.
Most of the G20 countries
Dominic Strauss-Kahn believes that a repeat of the 2008 global financial collapse is inevitable.
I won't say it can happen again. It will happen again. When? I don't know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But there's no reason to believe that we have the silver bullet that make it possible to avoid any kind of crisis in the global economy. The question is to try to, first, prevent, avoid as much as possible, and when we're unable to avoid the crisis, to have tools to mitigate the effect of the crisis.
While politicians argued over regulations which might prevent the next global crisis, along came an explosion which made everyone think it was already here. In the spring of 2010, it looked as if the next global financial crisis was already starting. The government of Greece had sunk dangerously into debt and would no longer be able to pay its creditors. Demonstrations filled the streets of Athens as millions lost pay and benefits.
Είναι δυσίωνο. Παιδιά, δεν τα βλέπω καλά τα πράγματα και μάλλον είμαστε έτοιμοι για άλλη γη και άλλα μέρη. Αυτό.
Είναι πολύ δύσκολο, πάρα πολύ δύσκολο. Φοβάμαι θα έρθουν πολύ χειρότερες μέρες, πολύ πιο δύσκολες μέρες.
Τίποτα, την πτώχευση. Νομίζω ότι είναι αναπόφευκτο. Επειδή έχω μια επαφή με οικονομικά θέματα, θεωρώ ότι δεν υπάρχει τίποτα άλλο πέρα από αυτό, δυστυχώς.
Many international investors believed that if Greece fell, other countries such as Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Ireland would not be far behind. All those countries found it very hard to borrow money.
Why should I lend any money to you unless I trust that you're going to pay me back? And if you show that you are not reliable, I'm not going to trust you, or I'm going to demand huge interest rates in terms of making my next loan to you. Sovereigns are no different from banks, no different from individuals. So we've got to restore trust.
Trust was supposed to be restored in Greece and other weak European countries with a $1 trillion bailout funded by the strongest European powers and the International Monetary Fund. Dominic Strauss-Kahn worries that the bailout is only a temporary solution to Europe's problems.
The problem of Europe is a bigger problem than the Greek crisis. The problem of Europe is a problem of low growth. The problem of Europe is the fact that there's almost no increase in productivity, and that there's this huge set of countries accounting for close to 1/3 of the global GDP is just unable to, in the recovery, to take advantage of the recovery.
So far, the recovery in most parts of the world has been funded by massive government spending. This was the way to quickly create jobs in everything from construction to engineering, and thus alleviate the unemployment crisis.
Now, a lot of people would say you're just putting off the pain for a later date, and indeed we are. What we're doing is those governments are taking on debt to do that, and it's our children and grandchildren who presumably will eventually have to repay that debt in order to finance our little rescue today, which might not work and might only put things, put a day of reckoning off for another couple of years.
For some leaders, such as Nicolas Sarkozy of France, the global financial crisis has been a profound shock that radically transformed their view of the world. Sarkozy has always been seen as a right-wing free enterpriser, very much pro-capitalist and pro-American. Then France was rocked by plant closures and labor upheavals. Some workers even kidnapped their bosses and turned to other forms of violence.
Il nous faut trouver.
In September 2008, Sarkozy gave a speech that astonished his audience.
Le laisser-faire, c'est fini. Le marché tout-puissant qui a toujours raison, c'est fini.
Je vous l'ai dit, je crois qu'on a tous changé au travers de cette crise. Et en même temps que la bulle immobilière et que la bulle financière s'est dégonflée, ça nous a tous permis de faire un peu un examen de conscience de la création de valeur, de la répartition des ressources, de l'allocation des richesses, de la stratégie des pays les uns à l'égard des autres, de la mesure du bien-être. Je crois que sur tous ces points-là, nous avons tous évolué, le président de la République aussi.
Ce sont des principes simples sur lesquels je ne céderai pas.
President Sarkozy has asked some of the world's leading economists to come up with new ways of measuring growth and prosperity, to give greater consideration to the environment and quality of life. He wants a rethinking of capitalism.
What gets measured gets done. Si vous n'êtes pas capable de mesurer quelque chose, vous ne faites rien, vous n'améliorez rien puisque vous ne savez pas par rapport à quoi vous vous basez. Donc la mesure des choses est extrêmement importante. Je vous donne un exemple. Si vous pensez que l'eau n'a aucun prix, vous laissez couler tous vos robinets, ça n'a pas de prix. Et pourtant ça a un coût. Vous consommez de l'eau. Donc il faut, pour chaque chose, pouvoir fournir une valeur, pouvoir fixer un prix.
While many Western nations are rethinking capitalism, China is embracing it with a fervor that could prove dangerous. The Chinese economy has been surging ahead in the last few years, and many economists seem to believe that China can become a kind of engine that pulls the world out of recession. Chinese consumers are becoming richer, and there is hope that their increased spending will kickstart the global economy. On the other hand, there is widespread concern that the next real estate bubble that will lead to the next global meltdown is already inflating here. In the world's largest municipality, Chongqing, you see the construction of an endless supply of apartments right beside other apartment buildings that are largely unoccupied. Scenes eerily familiar from the real estate bubble which preceded the 2008 meltdown in Dubai and elsewhere. The Chinese Communist Party, however, tends to conceal any unpleasant facts about the economy here. Professor Michael Pettis teaches in the business school at Beijing University. He says China watchers have to resort to odd measures to try to get at the truth about the real estate bubble.
A friend of mine in Shanghai came up with a very interesting indirect way of measuring inventory in Shanghai. You know, a couple months ago we had an eclipse of the sun at 10 o'clock in the morning in Chinatown, and it was a total eclipse in Shanghai. So his reasoning was at 10 o'clock in the morning you're supposed to be at work, so all the office lights should be on. And he just rode around the city checking out the office lights. And he said that that's not a very scientific measure, but it led him to feel that there was an awful lot of empty office space.
Now there has been a more scientific study in which electricity consumption was closely measured in new office buildings and condominiums. The study confirms an enormous glut of unused office space and estimates that there are 65 million empty apartments in China, all evidence of a very dangerous real estate bubble. In the next few years, China and India are expected to take over some of the top spots among the world's leading economies, which only increases the worry about financial meltdowns starting there.
If we're affected by a slowdown in the United States, if we're affected by a slowdown in Europe, what's going to happen when the two economies, 2.5 billion people, China and India, when there's a slowdown there? What's going to happen when a hedge fund fails in India? What's going to happen when there's a mortgage meltdown in China? The effect on the rest of us is going to be enormous. And the time to deal with those kinds of issues is now, before, in fact, it happens. Because if we don't ensure that Chinese banks are transparent, if we don't ensure that the Indian financial industry has a set of regulations that at least live to a minimal world standard, then we are going to be in a mess that's going to make today look like a picnic.
In the last 2 years, Canadians learned about the power and unpredictability of a financial crisis. Canada has had only a small taste of the wrenching protests and disruption that became the hallmark of the financial collapse around the world. This was the first truly global economic meltdown, where the interconnectedness of the world economy exploded in ways that very few bankers and economists had foreseen. And very few politicians knew how to deal with. History has taught world leaders that major economic crises like the Great Depression go on for years. Just when you think it's over, along comes another relapse. Even though the causes of the 2008 meltdown are now clear, there is no magic formula to stop it from happening again. The world has to start planning for the next crisis, even as we recognize that this one is not over yet.
In 2 weeks on Doxo, they are unique in every way. Conjoined sisters in BC have challenged the medical world and society at large.
Everybody's going to see them as freaks. They're special little girls and we love them.
Incredibly, they seem to share each other's senses.
They can definitely see and feel what each other's doing.
Fascinating is an understatement. Twins who share a brain. Next time on Doxo.